Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Silver Screen Shenanigans podcast. My name is Devin, and today we're going to be talking about uh, one of the most fantastic films of 2023. I might have spoken too soon, calling Godzilla Minus One the best movie of 2023 because I think it's probably in contention with the film I'm talking about today, Oppenheimer, directed by Christopher Nolan, with a star-studded cast. Just to list a few: Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., and Florence Pugh. Um, yeah, I mean, it was with that director, this cast, this story. Um, I mean, it's easy to say now that we knew it was going to be good, but it's really no surprise that it was a fantastic movie. A little bit of a spoiler from the in the very beginning. Yeah, I mean, nine out of 10, 10 out of 10, easily. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let's talk about the beginning of this movie. So a little bit of like historical pretext, because I am a sucker for that stuff. Um, the This is right after World War II, or like towards the tail end of it. You know, we're at war with the Germans and the Japanese, the Axis powers. Um, and things are getting tense. You know, the body count on all sides is mounting up. People want this thing to end. Um, and it's no surprise that the U.S. government had a secret base, secret plans with a bunch of people working on some type of thing, some type of weapon to, um, I guess, put the final nail in the coffin for this war, just to end it all, get it over with. And that's kind of what this story kind of revolves around, the people behind this secret project. So then the film opens up, and so apologies for listeners. It's I highly recommend to go watch this movie. It'll make a lot more sense. Plus, a fair warning: this movie does do a lot of jumping around, like past to present. Um, so be prepared. The film opens up in 1954 at the start of the security hearing for the renowned physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, played brilliantly by Cillian Murphy. People know him from Peaky Blinders and a couple of other appearances. I haven't had the pleasure to watch that show yet, but I've heard nothing but great things. And he brings an essence and a legitimacy to this movie as well. So it jumps around jumps around the following years as Admiral Louis Strauss, played by Robert Downey Jr., accompanied by his like little entourage, is acting against Oppenheimer in these hearings. From it's on the U.S. Senate floor, so this is some serious stuff going on. So the movie does kind of throw you in a little bit with these with this court case, and you're just kind of like, what's going on? What did he do? Etc. You know, there's a lot of questions going on, and trust me, the movie answers them all. Um, the Senate hearing is sort of testing out, hearing testimonials, evidence, yada yada, to see if J. Robert Oppenheimer has ties to communism. So a little more history: 1950s. This is the Red Scare era. This is so after World War II. We are sort of in a quote unquote Cold War with um, the Soviet Union. The United States and the Soviet Union emerge. World War II is the two dominant superpowers. And there's this tension between the two nations, to say the least. Um, and so they're investigating Oppenheimer to see if he is a communist, because during that time in the United States, that's a big no-no. That's a threat to national security. Um, but I think the movie does an excellent job in showing that it's really just a personal grudge between Louis Strauss and Oppenheimer that goes back to, I believe, the 40s, if I'm not wrong. Um, and so we learn that Strauss tried to recruit Oppenheimer back then to a position at Princeton. Oppenheimer, an intelligent man, a little, maybe a little aloof is maybe the right word. And then at the same time, he's a little condescending. Like he makes some remarks towards Strauss, I believe. And then uh, before this recruitment, Strauss is walking down to see Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein talking. And then when Strauss tries to greet Einstein, the man doesn't acknowledge him at all. And so Strauss believes that Oppenheimer said something to Einstein. So there's a lot of petty beef, I suppose. um, so back to 1924. This is sort of the chronological beginning, I suppose. Um, Oppenheimer begins to study physics as a student at Cambridge. They're under. Let me look this up. Forget his name. Da-da-da-da. Patrick Blanket, who's played by James DeCry, maybe. So, and I think this movie does an excellent job at portraying, or these couple scenes does an excellent job in showing Oppenheimer's mental state. Like he's up with uh uh sort of night terrors. And I think only a man of this intellect could have, because he's thinking about these great big designs. What is the purpose of like physics in the universe? What happens with the power of the nuclei and all these sort of things that I think would make sense to keep somebody up at night, like of this intelligence. Thinking about big and grand things. But we also see that Oppenheimer's mental state suffers in other areas because uh, I, he has sort of like this annoyance with the professor, and he puts potassium cyanide in uh, the apple that the professor is eating. The next day, Oppenheimer personally meets Niels Bohr, who is, I think, if I remember correctly, he's one of one of the most intelligent men when it came to physics. And he stops him from eating the tainted apple. And as they converse, Bohr is impressed by Oppenheimer's knowledge and research, and he encourages him to educate himself where he feels less restrained. And he tells Oppenheimer, do you hear the music? Um, and I think that means, do you hear the call to push yourself to do great things, maybe, if I understood that scene right. Um, so then, a few weeks later, Oppenheimer does begin studying at the University of, try to pronounce this, Göttingen, where he meets Isidore Rabi, and they work on theoretical physics, which, take a second here, I think you have to be a genius to even step in the realm of theoretical physics, because there's regular physics that I took a class on and tried my darndest, only understood a few things, like certain quote unquote laws that we presume to be true. A couple of those are pretty basic. But then once you get to the more complicated stuff, it's like, oh yikes. Takes a smart dude. And then you take it a step further and you go to theoretical physics, which is stuff that like is not it's theory. It's not very like um hands-on, I suppose. It's more like a thought process if I'm thinking about it correctly, which yeah, that seems like a whole different can of worms. Um so yeah, these two guys are very intelligent. And so then Oppenheimer goes back to the States, where he begins teaching. And it starts by like with one student, and the student's like, it was kind of a funny scene. The student like bursts through the door and sees Oppenheimer, and there's like nobody else in the room, because I think theoretical physics wasn't really taught at universities at the time. So the student like at first is like, "Oh, I'm in the wrong room," or like, "I must be extremely late." And Oppenheimer comes in and he's like, "No." And it's like, "What do you know about theoretical physics?" And it's pretty interesting. I think the first question that Oppenheimer talks about is like light, and like, what is light? Is it a particle? Is it particles or is it waves? And they say, yes, it's both. Well, how can it be both? It's paradoxical, yet it works. So, I mean, I think if you're interested in that sort of thing, I think sort of these thought experiments are very interesting. So then he kind of gets the reputation referred to as Oppie, which I don't know. I find that weird to call him Oppie, a man of his stature. I think for me anyway, I see it as like respect just to say his full name. But I imagine if you were like close to him, maybe a friend or a peer, it was just easier to call him Oppie. Um, so then after this one student, I imagine the class grows and they have like 10 or 12 people, and it becomes bigger and grander. So I think after teaching for a couple weeks or so, Oppenheimer would later attend a Communist Party gathering, which was very common at the time. And just because you had some of those, it's kind of like nowadays, where like somebody can have some left leaning tendencies, somebody can have some right leaning tendencies, conservative or liberal, and that does not necessarily mean you are a full part, like a part of that party. And I think that's what's going on here. Um, he probably attends because of his younger brother, Frank, played by Dylan Arnold, who I'm pretty sure was in You, the show called You, which is fantastic. Um, there, Oppenheimer uh, befriends a bunch of people. He then uh, meets uh I can't remember her name, but Florence Pugh. The lady is portrayed by Florence Pugh, and chatting before I don't know if it's like the whimsy of his knowledge or just like uh somebody who she finds very interesting, but before long they are together uh physically. And I don't know, it to me, I don't know if it's just like who I am. I lean a little bit conservative. I am a Christian. I have acknowledged that. I just find scenes like these sort of unnecessary. I find some sex scenes sort of unnecessary. Like I don't see necessarily the point. I think you can convey that they find each other interesting in other ways. Um, but after they are finished, uh, she finds a book, and it is Hindu Sanskrit, I believe. Uh, and Oppenheimer translate. Well, I think it's pretty cool again to show his intelligence that he understands Hindu Sanskrit. Um, Oppenheimer translates to what it reads, and it's, I think, the Hindu proverb of somebody showing immense power, and he translated it to say, "And now I've become death, the destroyer of worlds," which is going to have is pretty haunting foreshadowing, and I think it sets up what is later to come very well. Oppenheimer then goes to Frank and Lawrence to a ranch in Los Alamos. Frank and his girlfriend have officially joined the Communist Party, his brother, which Oppenheimer discourages despite his own left-leaning political views. And that all that has done is got more eyes on Oppenheimer being a communist, is what it looks like. Um uh so then I believe Oppenheimer joins a federation of architects, engineers, and chemists and technicians, the FAECT, which further fuels concerns that Oppenheimer is a communist because he's joining, I think, a union is what it is. Um, so it looks bad, even though it really isn't. But when it comes to politics, I believe it's Jean-Jacques Rousseau who says it doesn't matter what's actually going on, it only matters what it looks like. So during an afternoon out with Jean, maybe is her name, who's portrayed by Florence Pugh, Oppenheimer sees one of his students and reacting frantically because the news is broken that the Germans have split the uranium nucleus, uh, causing through like nuclear fission. And then we later learn that Hitler has invaded Poland. Um, kind of like, and it's the same sort of sentiment, same sort of reaction, kind of like in The Darkest Hour the movie that we talked about. It is a low point because I think people with uh any people who have any sense of intelligence and who aren't naive know that now the clock's ticking. The Germans will not stop. We have to find a way to stop them. So Oppenheimer, a little bit late. So like while the race is on, the the theoretical work needs to continue. Later, Oppenheimer meets his later to be wife, Catherine or Kitty Puning, played expertly by Emily Blunt. She is a stern, loving, no BS type of woman in this movie, and it's a great performance. So she is a member of the Communist Party, and she's in a failing marriage. After she splits from her husband, Kitty begins a relationship with Oppenheimer, eventually marrying and becoming pregnant by him. He goes and breaks things off with Jean, who is upset. Um, so Kitty gives birth to the son, yada, yada, yada. Peter becomes an alcoholic. The two leave Peter with excuse me, I think I messed it up. Oh, no. No, Peter the son, no, does not become an alcoholic. Kitty becomes an alcoholic because of the stress with Oppenheimer's like work strain and having the baby on her own. So the two leave Peter with some of their friends while Kitty and Oppenheimer they take a trip. Sorry, didn't imagine in this interview we were talking about drunk babies. Uh, so as they take the trip to a university, Oppenheimer is met by General Leslie Groves, who's played by Matt Damon, and meets a lieutenant, Colonel Kenneth Nichols, to recruit him to be the director of the Manhattan Project. Which, if any of you know about like history during this time, you know exactly where this is going. What the Manhattan Project is. It was a secret, like I mean, it became literally like a secret town where they tested, they tested the atomic bomb. They needed a big weapon, turn theory into a bomb, essentially. Oppenheimer begins to recruit other scientists because he can't do this on his own. Uh, as they set up shop in Los Alamos, where they construct a fake town. I mean, this was legit. They had like shops and everything just to like sort of make the living situations easier. So after they review schematics and components on the bomb, Oppenheimer, it's like the night that they're going to like drop this thing and test it. And Oppenheimer is talking with the general, Leslie, and they're talking about like I think the general asked Oppenheimer, and of course it's thunder and lightning. Why wouldn't it be on the night that they're testing a literal nuclear bomb? Um, the general Leslie asks Oppenheimer, he's like, why is one of your guys like taking bets on, I don't know, like total like planet destruction, or however he phrases it. Um, and Oppenheimer says, well, through our research, um, there was only the remote chance that we could ignite the atmosphere and cause a chain reaction that would destroy the entire world. And the general in disbelief, he goes, how remote? And Oppenheimer says near zero. And I think he says, what do you want from theory alone? And a pretty funny line from the general is zero. I want a 0% chance. um, so then I think that's like, they say an hour before they drop this thing. So, and I highly encourage you to watch it. Like on the poster, I'm going to attach to this recording. It's you see the mushroom cloud and how there's the ignition, the bomb goes off, and it's like in total silence. And I think this is one of the most fantastic scenes I have ever seen. They drop the bomb, it ignites, and you see like the flames coming up. It again, mind you, it's again in total silence. And then as the flames sort of start to rise, I think we hear from a recording from the actual J. Robert Oppenheimer played here. And I would like you guys very much to listen to what he had to say.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pretty haunting. Yeah, definitely pretty haunting. I would definitely argue for sure. So you can see where his mind is at. Oh, and I guess I forgot to mention, and for the like opening black screen, there's some text from the story of Prometheus in Greek mythology. And just real quick, if you're not familiar, Prometheus brought down the power of fire to the humans, and Zeus punished him because this was the power of the gods. And I think the symbolism here, right, is that Oppenheimer is, quote, testing the limits of humanity and giving us the power of the gods through the nuclear bomb. And, he's obviously thinking about the risks that entails. Does the means justify the ends, et cetera, et cetera. So after this, another flash forward shows Oppenheimer forming a program for the hydrogen bomb. Just bigger, more energy, more destruction, essentially. Men gather with their colleagues. After the Soviets test their own atomic bomb, Strauss and Nichols, both staunchly anti-communist, discuss the notion that there were several communists working at the Manhattan Project. And they're obviously concerned about leaks of information. During the security hearing, Oppenheimer involvement with Chevalier is discussed due to him trying to get information on the project on behalf of the Russians, which was treasonous. Lomatz is also drafted due to his involvement in left-wing politics, making him look like a risk. The matter is also complicated further during Oppenheimer's time on the project when he meets Colonel Boris Pass, who is the project head of security and personally goes after communists. And an anti-communist lawyer, William Borden, presents to the members of the hearing with an indictment of Oppenheimer for treason and whatnot, even though we obviously know he didn't do anything. So it's frustrating time in Oppenheimer's life when he's trying to build the bomb to fight the war to save America, and this is how he's treated. Not only is he thinking about the death and the risk involved, now the United States is trying to arrest him. Oppenheimer's relationship with Jean is also called into question because of her communist affiliations. He admits to his adultery to Kitty in the present, and she envisions again, this is such an unnecessary sex scene because in the interrogation room, I understand that what they're trying to get across with Kitty and Oppenheimer is their whole personal lives are out in the open, totally naked to the world. But I don't see the point of having a sex scene here. In 1949, Jean commits suicide via overdose. This is another cutback to her in a bathroom. But with a quick glimpse, it appears that there's a hand forcing her head under the water. So it's left open-ended if she was too much of a risk and somebody had her killed or she committed suicide. It's sort of left open-ended, which is a little bit scary, but I wouldn't put anything past the good old United States government. So Kitty finds Oppenheimer afterwards, and he's having a breakdown. I mean, he's a former lover that possibly was killed. But Kitty, being the strong woman that she is, she tells himself to pull it together. We gotta continue this thing. We're in the thick of it now. So sometime during the project's development, Bohr is brought to Los Alamos after being stuck in Europe due to Nazi occupation. Bohr tells Oppenheimer that he is giving mankind the power to destroy itself. And these are lasting words that Oppenheimer probably took to his grave. And man, I guess I'll continue that later. My thoughts on that. After Hitler's death, the team continues with the project since they need to bring the full war to an end because the Japanese are continuing to fight on, and a boots on the ground invasion would bring I don't even remember the number, but it's thousands upon thousands of United States men would be killed if they were to try to invade Japan on the ground. Because what I will say about Japanese soldiers is they were fanatic. They were going to fight to the death. So the team carries out several bomb tests, and after some time, they perfect their bomb and get it ready to initiate what Oppenheimer calls the Trinity test. Everyone gathers at a safe distance, and um, they test another bomb. Uh, so then we cut to a little bit later. Another fascinating figure in history, played expertly by Gary Oldman. We cut to President Harry Truman. He later decides to drop the atomic bomb. Like, yeah, FDR just died, who's the sitting president. Okay, now welcome Harry Truman. Um, okay, Mr. President, your first decision: do we drop the atomic bomb? um, and this weighs on Oppenheimer's conscience over the resulting casualties that he feels responsible for. He gives a speech to the team, who are all cheering him on, but he envisions the effects of the bomb. And so he's talking to this crowd of people, and then like there's flashes in his mind of like death, destruction, burning, and my goodness, I can't imagine what that poor man's mind went through. Oppenheimer later meets Truman, who initially congratulates him on the bomb's development, but then Oppenheimer, like, totally understandably invokes like sympathy and like regret over dropping the bomb. And this is true. I've read this like in Truman. From all accounts, this is true from President Truman's like autobiography or biography. He tells Oppenheimer that he's a crybaby, and I never want him back in the Oval Office. And it's like, woof. Well, Truman, certainly a man of his time. uh, Years later, around the time of the Senate hearing, Strauss tells his aide that he was blacklisted from every university, doing to be a communist, and Oppenheimer had begun to form an arms control program as opposed to one for the atomic bomb, but Truman rejected it. Strauss also had informed Oppenheimer that one of his members in the Manhattan Project was a spy for the Soviets and fed information, on their research and development to the Russians. Well, that sucks. And so this also looks really bad for the team. Oppenheimer advocates that they should stop development for nuclear weapons, but because of the time of the Cold War, that's a no-go. And it's an unfortunate deal because the toothpaste is already out. Can't put it back in. And now that the world has the power of the gods, they're going to multiply it. And he's understandably, as I think many people in the right mind would be, that the United States is going to blow themselves up, or the world would blow themselves up. Throughout the time of the security hearing, we cut back to that. Katie becomes angry at Oppenheimer for seemingly trying to self-sabotage himself so that he may look like a martyr due to the guilt over his creation. Oppenheimer is interrogated by Roger Robb and others like Tellerabi, Groves, Pash. They all give testimonies about their time spent with the man. Robb demands to know Oppenheimer's view on why Oppenheimer's view on nuclear weapons development changed, and he says it was due to the realize that America would use whatever weapon it had to win, no matter the cost. So because Teller and Groves, Oppenheimer is ultimately deemed loyal to America, but he has his security clearance revoked and loses all political influence. So he wins this thing, but he's still kicked out. So as Strauss, ever the man to climb up, stepping on heads to climb up the political ladder, goes after a position in the Senate, But former technician David Hill gives testimony against Strauss due to the actions against Oppenheimer over personal grievances, which is just true. It's just flat out true. Including the moment during another hearing where Oppenheimer refuted Strauss as being more useful than a sandwich. Strauss loses his chance at the Senate because he's called out for like this petty personal grievance, and the aide turns on him after realizing his intentions. The aide also lets him know that JFK was JFK, who was like a part of the Senate, was one of the men who voted against Strauss's actions, which I thought that was pretty cool. Little mention of JFK, one of the better presidents. So then we cut to when we see a conversation between. This is one of the last scenes in the movie. We cut to a conversation between J. Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein. So this is kind of like after Einstein's big moments in physics, but he's still very influential and helpful to the conversations throughout the movie with Oppenheimer. And so as they approach each other, it does one more flash forward to their discussion. It shows what they discussed like throughout like flashbacks throughout the movie. And so Oppenheimer, they talk about his award received from LBJ, President LBJ in 1963. They talk about the implications of the work of nuclear weapons. And I think this is one of the best endings to a movie I've ever seen as Einstein begins to walk away. Oppenheimer very solemnly, very matter-of-factly looks to Einstein and says, "Do you remember the calculations I brought to you that could cause a chain reaction that would destroy the entire world?" Einstein replies, "I remember it very well. What of it?" Oppenheimer says, "I believe we did." Ooh. Yeah, no, that left me uh in like an existential crisis for a couple days. Um with the thought, right? Is that how we're going to end ourselves, through nuclear annihilation? Uh well, it hasn't happened yet. So here's to it not happening. I suppose. And this is how the movie ends, with Oppenheimer looking at this little pond that they're standing to with like ripples in the water as they go out, symbolizing I believe, and then it sort of like emphasizes or then cuts to at some point in the movie of like these ripples symbolizing like nuclear bombs striking all over the earth and destroying ourselves. And yeah, that's how it ends, with those thoughts. Woof. Um, my goodness, what a fantastic, thought-provoking, like just incredible film. It, I, when thinking about the man Oppenheimer, I think this movie does a fantastic job explaining his motivations, his thoughts, his regrets. I can't imagine that man like ever got a restful night's sleep with the amount of stuff that was going on inside of his mind. And I think it was really a disservice from the United States government to have this guy do the work that he did and then be punished for it, essentially. Um, Not only having to deal with the consequences of the bomb itself, the tragedy it caused, but to then be persecuted by his own government. I mean, really, I mean, just like his biography says, which I also need to get. He's the modern day Prometheus, absolutely. Um, but I don't know what else I can say. The special effects in this movie, I believe they actually detonated a bomb, not a nuclear bomb, but I'm pretty sure they detonated something. Christopher Nolan is that type of guy. The cast, the effects, uh the acting, the pacing, the general story of the man's life, all fantastic. I don't know if I think uh I don't know. For as of 2023, it's up there with Godzilla minus one. These two movies are definitely like advocates for the best of 2023. And yeah, I don't know what else like more I can say. It's a fantastic movie. Highly recommend you go and watch it. So this was another episode of the Silver Screen Shenanigans podcast, a more possibly thought-provoking episode. And I thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next time.